Hi there, my name's Katlin DeWitt. I'm the Forest Health Specialist with the Virginia Department of Forestry, and today I'll be talking about invasive species in Virginia. I figured we would start this video by talking about a broad definition of what invasive species are. And the broad definition is that it is a species whose introduction is likely to or will cause economic, environmental, or harm to human health. The main pathways that these invasive species are introduced are global trade, intentional introductions, the horticulture and nursery trade, and also movement of firewood. For the purpose of today's video, we're going to be splitting it up into invasive insects and their control, as well as invasive plants and how to control those. The first invasive insect that we'll talk about in Virginia is the spongy moth. Spongy moth is the new name for gypsy moth. It was changed as of 2022 by the Entomological Society of America. Spongy moth is an early season defoliator, which means it comes out in spring right after the trees begin to leaf out, and it feeds on all the tender new foliage. This stresses the trees out by feeding on those tender new leaves and stripping them bare, which means the trees have to put out a new flush of foliage, depleting stored resources they have. Spongy moth is originally from Europe, and it was brought over in the late 1800s by a man that wanted to breed better silk moths, which did not work, and so he tossed them out in his backyard, and they have since spread from New England down to Virginia, which is the state holding line for where spongy moth is. Spongy moth has a large host list, but its preferred hosts are oaks of many species, including chestnut oak on high elevation ridgetops. The spongy moth life cycle, as we see here, will start over here with the adults. We've got the female that is a whiter color, and then the male, which is just kind of a brown moth. Spongy moth females will lay her eggs in late summer and to fall. Fall is a great time to start scouting your trees for spongy moth egg masses. Females are so heavy with eggs that they cannot fly, and the males will fly to her, attracted by pheromones. Once they've mated, the female will lay an egg mass, which is over here. This will be on pretty much any flat structure or the undersides of branches, wherever they're protected from the elements. It's kind of this rust-colored, slightly fuzzy egg mass, and inside are individual eggs that she's covered with this hairy substance. And they're those very characteristic hairy caterpillars, which are there are 6 pairs of red dots, 4 pairs of blue dots. So very, very distinctive caterpillars. They'll feed, and then they'll eventually pupate. This is the pupal casing. This will be on the trees or any sort of flat structure where the caterpillars end up until late summer, and then the adults will emerge again and start the whole process. For individual tree or yard tree control of spongy moth, you can put up burlap bands around the tree, which will capture caterpillars as they move up and down the tree to feed. The next invasive insect that we'll talk about is spotted lanternfly. Spotted lanternfly is an invasive insect from Asia, first detected in Pennsylvania in 2014 and then found in Virginia in 2018. This invasive insect has a large host list as nymphs, but its preferred host is tree of heaven, Lanthus altissima. Spotted lanternfly has a 1-year life cycle in Virginia. It overwinters as egg masses, and the female spotted lanternfly will lay an egg mass on any flat surface that she can get to. The eggs will hatch in early to late spring, and they'll go through 4 nymphal instars, or developmental stages between molts, before they turn into adults. The adults will mate in late fall, and the female will lay her egg mass. One female can lay 1 to 2 egg masses with up to 70 individual eggs in each egg mass. The eggs are laid in individual rows and then covered with a waxy secretion, or putty-like substance. So we have the adults, which when they are not flying, they usually hold their wings in this kind of tent-like position. It's a little hard to see because they're smushed down. But when they do fly and they reveal this hind wing, it's got this bright red coloration on it. So they're very distinctive-looking adults. This is the egg mass. It's a little hard to see the right coloration because it's been autoclaved to make sure that there's no actual viable eggs in there. But you can kind of see where there's like individual rows of eggs, and then she had covered it with this gray secretion to protect it from the element. These will be how they overwinter, and then in spring we'll have the young nymphs. These effectively look the same, they just get bigger for the first 3 instars. Then they become the older nymph, the 4th instar, which turns bright red. And you can see they have these kind of funny protrusions in the front of their face, which again make them look very distinctive. And then at the end of the summer, we'll have the adults and the life cycle will start all over again. The spotted lanternfly is not considered a major forest pest like emerald ash borer or spongy moth. However, it is considered a major nuisance pest, and it will be something that you might see on trees in your yard or your local parks since it has such a large host list. Spotted lanternfly is a nuisance because it feeds with piercing, sucking mouth parts, and it'll feed on the woody tissue of its host plants. It'll take in too much of that sugary substance, so much so that it has to excrete it in the form of honeydew. Honeydew will be excreted from the back half of a spotted lanternfly and will fall and cover anything that might be underneath the host that it's feeding on. The honeydew also attracts problematic insects such as ants and stinging wasps that like that to feed on. It also can grow sooty mold on top of the honeydew, which, if it's falling on other plants, can reduce photosynthesis, or if it's falling on your deck or playground equipment, is just nasty and not what you want to have in your backyard. Spotted lanternfly is easily controlled with contact insecticides, or if you want to target their preferred host, Ailanthus altissima, you can kill the tree itself, reducing the availability of it to feed on that host. Our next invasive insect in Virginia is the emerald ash borer. The emerald ash borer is an invasive wood-boring beetle native to Asia that was first brought over and detected in North America in the early 2000s up in Michigan. It's been in Virginia since 2008 and is now in most counties in Virginia except the far southeastern corner of the state. The emerald ash borer has a life cycle in Virginia where the adults are active in spring for a short period of time. Basically, the function of the adults is to come out, find each other, mate, and lay eggs. Shortly after the eggs are laid, they hatch, and the tiny larvae will then bore into the tree where they'll spend the majority of their life cycle feeding under the bark in the inner phloem tissue. They'll get larger and larger as they feed and create these S-shaped galleries underneath the bark, effectively girdling the tree from the inside out. The emerald ash borer can kill a tree in as little as 3 to 5 years, and some noticeable symptoms of emerald ash borer damage includes canopy dieback, epicormic sprouting, which is a stress response to the tree from not having as much foliage at the top and just wanting to have as much foliage as they can to photosynthesize. Ash trees become very fragile as the emerald ash borer feeds under the bark. This is due to the fact that as they're feeding and girdling the phloem tissue, the ability of the tree to move water up to the canopy is reduced, and the tree effectively dries out, which makes it very susceptible for limbs dropping or the tree falling and snapping during wind events. There are control options available to protect ash trees in your yard. Chemical control is very effective. There's a couple of options that you can do. You can do a trunk injection with the product imamectin benzoate, which is very effective at controlling emerald ash borer, but it does need to be reapplied every 2 to 3 years. You can also do a soil drench with an imidacloprid product, which is good for every year and is less effective, but still is better than nothing. It's important that if you have an ash tree in your yard, you make sure that you have decided if you want to treat the tree or if you want to go ahead and have the tree removed, because something needs to be done before that tree becomes a liability. Treating trees is a priority for the Department of Forestry Forest Health Program. Even on our headquarters campus, we have been working to treat what ash trees we have. This little guy right here has been treated and hopefully protected for emerald ash borer for a couple years. So here we have the adult emerald ash borer and then the larval emerald ash borer. Again, the adults are only out for a very short period of time. You'll probably never ever see an adult. Their purpose is basically just to mate and reproduce. The larvae are the ones that go under the bark and feed on that phloem tissue. And they don't really look like much, kind of just segmented worm-like thing, but they actually feed under the bark and they've created all of these galleries. You can tell this whole tree has been chewed up. And that's what girdles the tree and disrupts that movement of water and nutrients and kills them. So if you have a tree that is dead, you suspect it's a dead ash tree. If you peel the bark and you see that, that's a good indication. Some outward signs, we mentioned crown decline, but also if you happen to find a D-shaped hole, that's a good indication, because when the adults come out after they've pupated under the bark, they have this characteristic D-shaped hole that they leave. Sometimes that's hard to find depending on how thick the bark is or if it's in a bark crevice, but sometimes you'll find a perfect little D-shaped hole. The hemlock woolly adelgid is an invasive sap-sucking insect from Asia. It was first brought over in the 1950s and introduced outside of Richmond, Virginia. It's since spread through the entire range of eastern and Carolina hemlocks on the east coast of the United States. It's a tiny insect that is only mobile for a short period of time as a crawler stage, and then as an adult, it settles at the base of the needles and feeds during the winter time on the stored photosynthate, which over time will kill the tree because it reduces the tree's ability to produce a new flush of needles in the spring. This insect is not one that you'll probably notice unless you accidentally brush up against it. But what you will notice is on the underside of the branches, these white little cotton ball looking things, which is actually a waxy secretion that the adult HWA produces to cover itself and protect itself from the elements.